This video is sponsored by Fidei, a Catholic technology alternative to big tech companies. Fidei provides email, calendar services, file and collaborative options, forums for individuals, families, businesses, parishes, and nonprofit operations. Check out the link in the description box for more information. A few days ago, I gave you some news from various sources that seems to be confirming that the thumbscrews are being tightened on the traditional Latin Mass. One of them was a letter from an unnamed diocese from his bishop to a priest warning him that, well, the Canon 87 exclusion or excuse that bishops have invoked to not implement Traditionis Custodes was coming to an end because Rome was essentially quietly threatening bishops into submission. I paired that with news from Atlanta of the implementation of the ending of not only the traditional Latin Mass in all but a handful of places in the diocese, but also the functional end of the Reverent or Unicorn Novus Ordo. That is the new Mass done in a way that resembles the traditional Latin Mass, typically ad orientem posture of the priest combined with Latin, in every way looking as much like an actual traditional Catholic Mass as is possible with the new Mass. And most people forget that Traditionis Custodes and its follow-up documents essentially ended that practice, forbade it, that the bishop has to give explicit permission to the priests in the diocese who want to offer the new Mass in that way. And furthermore, those bishops have to actually get permission from Rome to let their priests do that. And such permissions are usually denied. I now have, from a source of mine that is trustworthy, the letter from Cardinal Arthur Roche, the prefect in charge of essentially enforcing Francis's will on the church regarding the liturgy, his letter to various bishops telling them Canon 87 is not allowable for them to use to end the tradition, to keep the traditional Mass, to ignore Traditionis Custodes. It's a form letter too. Like the version that I have is a form letter. It has fill in the blanks, for names and dates. It's a remarkable letter, and it proves my hypothesis that they were sending form letters to various dioceses. If you want to read the thing for yourself, I'll have a link to where I got it from online. It's a Twitter account that you should follow. He's clearly an anonymous Twitter account with sources either in Rome or himself working in the Roman Curia. I'm not sure which. I haven't asked, and I'm not going to. But everything I've been told from this source is spectacularly accurate. So with that said, here's the letter from Cardinal Roche, and I'll give you some thoughts on this at the end. The form letter of Archbishop Arthur Roche, Cardinal Arthur Roche, to an unnamed bishop that spells out how they're going to get around Canon 87 of the Code of Canon Law. Note here that the document has no date on it. It's literally just got a fill-in-the-blank spot for date, and no name of the bishop here. This is a classic form letter. With that said, Your Excellency, as you are aware, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, issued the motu proprio, Traditionis Custodes, concerning the use of the Roman liturgy prior to the reform of 1970 on the 16th of July, 2021. Subsequently, on the 21st of December, 2021, this dicastery, then congregation, with the express approval of the Holy Father, issued the responsa ad dubia on some dispositions of the motu proprio. The Holy Father was clear on the path to be taken by the Universal Church and restored to the diocesan bishops their competency as the guardians and promoters of the liturgical life of that part of the Church entrusted to their care. Thus it is for the bishops to regulate the use of the antecedent liturgy within their dioceses. However, there are two instances when a diocesan bishop must petition Rome for a dispensation from the dispositions of the motu proprio. One is for the use of a parish church for the celebration of the Mass using the Missale Romanum of 1962, see Article 3, subsection 2 of Traditionis Custodes. The other is for priests ordained after the 16th of July 2021 to be allowed to celebrate the Mass using the Missale Romanum of 1962, see Article 4 of Traditionis Custodes. Understandably, in the immediate wake of the publication of the motu proprio, Bishops sought to implement its dispositions, taking into account the pastoral requirements of their own local church. In some instances, this led bishops to invoke Canon 87, subsection 1 of the Code of Canon Law, so that they themselves could grant a dispensation in order to allow the continued celebration of Mass with the Missale Romanum of 1962 in a parish church, without seeking a dispensation from this dicastery. Unfortunately, this is a misreading of the aforementioned canon, as well as contrary to the clearly stated intent of the motu proprio and the responsa ad dubia. Canon 87, subsection 1, has generally been invoked in the following terms. Quote, whenever he judges that it contributes to their spiritual welfare, the diocesan bishop can dispense the faithful from disciplinary laws, both universal and those particular laws made by the supreme ecclesiastical authority for his territory on his subjects. Stated thus, it would seem that the diocesan bishop could indeed dispense from Article 3, subsection 2 of the motu proprio. However, the same canon goes on to state, quote, he, the diocesan bishop, cannot dispense from procedural laws or from the penal laws, nor from those whose dispensation is specifically reserved to the apostolic see or to some other authority. This brings us to Article 7 of the motu proprio, which states that, quote, the Congregation for Divine Worship in the discipline of the sacraments and the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, for matters of their particular competence, exercise the authority of the Holy See with respect to the observance of these provisions. Therefore, the text of the motu proprio itself is clear that the ability to dispense from Article 3, subsection 2, lies within the Apostolic See as the text of Canon 87, subsection 1, itself provides for. Furthermore, the responsa ad dubia of the then Congregation for Divine Worship makes exactly the same point, and the explanatory note gives the reasoning behind why this manner is reserved to the Holy See, to the Apostolic See. Again, it is clear that Canon 87, subsection 1, cannot be invoked to dispense from a law which is reserved to the Apostolic See. A motu proprio is an instrument by which the Holy Father legislates in order that the law is clear to all. Not only did the Holy Father issue Traditionis Custodes, he approved the responsa ad dubia, so there can be no doubt about his wishes in this regard, given that it is stated in such a clear way in both documents. It is worth underlining that, as the name motu proprio indicates, the nature of this document arises from the personal decision of the Holy Father. Furthermore, he concludes Traditionis Custodes by clearly stating, quote, everything that I have declared in this apostolic letter in the form of motu proprio I order to be observed in all its parts, anything else to the contrary notwithstanding, even if worthy of particular mention. In your Excellency's case, by means of a letter dated, fill in the blank, you published a policy for implementing the motu proprio in which you invoke Canon 87. I, fill in the blank. While commending your Excellency's pastoral solicitude for these groups of the faithful, we simply remind you that the competency to grant such dispensation lies with the dicastery. Therefore, in order to ensure that the Holy Father's wishes are respected, we request that you petition this dicastery for a dispensation for the Mass according to the Missale Romanum of 1962 to be celebrated in the parish churches in question. The petition should include a relatio containing details of the number of participants at these Masses. Importantly, it should also recount the steps being taken to lead the faithful who are attached to the antecedent liturgy towards the celebration of the liturgy according to the liturgical books reformed by the decree of the Second Vatican Council, and which form the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite. This relatio will assist us in making a decision on which dispensation should be granted, and whether the clear direction traced by Pope Francis in his motu proprio is being accepted and followed. We thank Your Excellency in advance for the steps that now need to be taken to ensure the correct application of the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, and we are at your disposition should you require any further assistance in this regard. With every good wish and kind regard, in Domino, Arthur Cardinal Roche, Prefect. All right, the first takeaway that you should have from this is that, hilariously, Cardinal Roche actually told the bishops that Francis gave them control, returned control to them over the liturgy, implying or flat out stating that Summorum Pontificum took control of the liturgy and liturgical norms away from the bishop. To a degree, that's true because Benedict XVI in Summorum Pontificum reiterated the fact that the traditional Mass had never been abrogated, that had never been formally suppressed, and that every priest has the right to say that Mass. Thus, this is what he means by control being given back to the bishops. But then immediately he sort of contradicts himself by saying that, reminding them that bishops actually have to get permission from Rome for their priest to offer the traditional mass. And we've seen this in other statements from bishops, where on that video I did earlier in the week, where the unnamed bishop reminds his priests that exclusions or exceptions to Traditionis Custodes, when requested from Rome, have been given very, very seldomly. There have been very few exceptions granted to Traditionis Custodes. I know of one in the entire world. So that's how rare it is. Very few given. Given other documents and Traditionis itself calls for an end to even the reverent Novus Ordo, what is clear is that Rome is not giving authority back to the bishops. It is instead taking it from them. The other thing you should note here, and Roach wanted to make sure that this was understood, this letter reiterates that no priest ordained after July of 2021 is likely to be permitted to lawfully offer the traditional Mass. Each of those priests must request permission through their bishop to Rome for them to be able to offer the Mass. That is a sunset on the Mass. It's actually, I think, the biggest weakness of Traditionis Custodes in terms of its implementation, because it assumes that there are going to be like-minded pontiffs following Francis for the next 4 decades. That is an assumption I would not make on their part. But then again, my suspicion is Traditionis Custodes is meant as a temporary document, and that we are going to see something much more draconian coming that will formally end the Latin Mass, not just at the diocesan level, but will find a way to force the FSSP to get with the times and offer probably a reverent version of the Novus Ordo. Also note that the document here makes no exceptions for the FSSP and other such groups. And the rumor we're hearing from Rome is that all ordinations, confessions, everything else, and sacramentals, meaning probably your brown scapular and the blessing of your rosary and everything else, must be done in the vernacular in the post-conciliar form of those things. Welcome to the brave new world. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments, please. If you want to read it for yourself, I'll have it linked again in my show notes today at returntotradition.org. Just look for today's post, a post with the same title as this video. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.